A celebration of independence. Zimbabwe marks the 33rd anniversary of its liberation from British colonial rule. But decades on, has a former freedom fighter named Robert Mugabe changed life for the better? And with elections looming, can Africa's longest-serving president survive yet another political challenge? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Robert Mugabe has been addressing supporters in Harare as Zimbabwe celebrates independence from Britain. It's something he's been doing now for more than 3 decades. And at 89 years old, he appears to have no plans to stop. Mugabe intends to contest elections scheduled for later this year. Addressing crowds at the National Sports Stadium in Harare, he urged Zimbabweans to vote peacefully, to confound what he called foreign critics. But there's both optimism and anger going towards that presidential poll. A referendum on a new constitution was successfully carried out last month. A resounding 95% backed the new charter. It imposes a limit of 2 5-year terms on the office of the president. It strengthens human rights and calls for impartiality in the police and the military. But many Zimbabweans say even now they have yet to enjoy the fruits of independence. The economy is showing signs of improvement since the unity government was formed in 2008, but critics point to food and fuel shortages, rampant corruption, unemployment and poverty. It's estimated up to 80% of Zimbabweans are below the poverty threshold. That's the minimum level of income deemed adequate to live in Zimbabwe. Haru Mutasa has been following the Independence Day celebrations for Inside Story.
Independence Day celebrations are taking place in the capital, Harare, here in Zimbabwe. Behind me, we've got school children doing a display for President Robert Mugabe, other government officials, and Prime Minister Mugabe, and people in general who've come and packed the National Sports Stadium here in the capital. The President's speech was predictable. He spent most of his time trying to highlight the achievements made in Zimbabwe in the 33 years of independence, but he also acknowledged the fact that there are problems, economic hardships, and he spoke about what he plans to do to help his people through that. But this is an election year, and he urged his people to remain peaceful during campaigning and voting.
I urge all our people to replicate the peaceful and tranquil atmosphere that characterized our referendum, and thus shun all forms of hate and violence.
But opposition groups say that levels of violence and intimidation are increasing. And although Zimbabweans are celebrating 33 years of independence from British colonial rule, they are worried about the elections expected later this year. Some people say, or some opposition groups say, that they are concerned that President Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF party will use state resources to make sure he wins the election. President Robert Mugabe and Prime Minister Mugabe are in the tent over there, that red and white tent behind me. They're sitting together. Now, they've been in a power-sharing government for the last 5 years, but Mugabe's ZANU-PF party is saying it no longer wants to share power with Tsvangirai's MDC party, and they're saying they'll do whatever it takes to make sure they win the election expected later this year. Haru Mutasa reporting for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining me on the line from Harare is Obert Gutu from the Movement for Democratic Change, T. Obert is spokesman for the Harare province. And in Harare, Bright Matonga, a member of Parliament for the ZANU-PF party. And in London, Georgina Godwin, a Zimbabwean-born broadcaster and journalist. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Bright Matonga. The Constitution has been agreed on, yet there's no agreement yet on an election date. Why the delay?
Well, I think the Constitution did set the precedent for what is going to happen in Zimbabwe. It was very peaceful. And really what is left now is to align the old Constitution to the new Constitution. The old rules that have got to be put in place. The process has got to go to Parliament. We're going on the 7th of May to debate, where we have 3 readings on the lower house and the same to the upper house, the House of Senate. From there on, I think then the President will put up a team to align the new Constitution with the old Constitution. Then he will sign the bill and it becomes law, then you then announce your elections. But I think so far so good, as you heard from Hari's report. The Prime Minister was there, the President was there. So it's a very peaceful atmosphere in Zimbabwe. People are happy. We had about 2,000 centers. I would call them birthday centers because it's our independence, 33 years. And people are happy, no violence. And of course, some people would try to manufacture violence that doesn't exist. But so far, so good. I'm happy that Zimbabweans are taking charge of their destiny. It doesn't matter which political party you belong to. People sit down and discuss. And I'm sure the President and the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister as principals will sit down and agree on a date. But let me point out that it is the President's prerogative to announce the election date, not the other principals, but the President of Zimbabwe.
That point taken, Bright Matonga. Let's go to Obert Gutu and ask him whether you expect the election sooner rather than later. When would you like to see the President announce that date for the election?
Going forward, I actually see elections being held around September 2013. Why I say so is because, as Bright Matonga was saying, there is a new constitution draft that will be debated in Parliament on May the 7th. And what has to be happening simultaneously with the debate of the draft constitution is the harmonization of certain laws with the new constitution. In particular, there is the Electoral Act that has been made, or that has to be made to harmonize with the new constitution, particularly with reference to issues like the so-called alien voters. As you know, people who were born and bred in Zimbabwe, but whose parents or grandparents were from within the region, Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, were not treated or were not considered as Zimbabwean citizens. So what then happens is, in terms of the new constitution, all those people who were born in Zimbabwe but of foreign parentage will automatically qualify to register as voters, as citizens. So there has also to be a need to also harmonize the citizenship laws to allow the thousands, if not millions, of these formerly disenfranchised Zimbabweans to be able to register to vote.
Well, let's go to Georgina Godwin at that particular point, if I may. Oh, but sorry to interrupt you. But to put that point there to Georgina Godwin, the Constitution being aligned with the old Constitution, we are being told, which would, according there to the MDC spokesman, actually give a vote to tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people who didn't have a vote before.
Well, and there's lots of people who haven't had a vote before who we thought did have a vote, i.e. all the dead people who were on the register. I think the MDC hasn't actually been allowed to see the voters' roll to do a proper audit of it, and nobody has actually sorted it out. It's in terrible disarray. So there are a number of reasons why we should delay for a while. One is to get the voters' roll sorted out. But secondly, I don't know who's going to pay for this election. Obviously, there are huge resources coming out of the Chiazwa diamond fields, but those don't seem to be making their way into government coffers. Or certainly into the coffers that would pay for the elections. The United Nations had just offered to give, I think, in the region of $130 million to pay for the election. However, they wanted access to all stakeholders, including civic society. Patrick Chinamasa has said that that's not possible. The UN may not speak to those people, and therefore the Zimbabwean government doesn't want their money to run the elections. So with the best will in the world, everybody can want the elections. There isn't a voters' roll that's ready to go, and nor is there the money to pay for it.
Well, let's go back to Bright Matonga on that specific issue of turning down the money that the United Nations was to give to pay for that electoral process, some $140 million. We heard the Foreign Minister announcing that he would not accept that money on the conditions that the United Nations had attached. Why was this decision taken, and how will the country pay for the elections when they happen?
I think the United Nations should know better. Zimbabwe is a sovereign state, so you can't put conditions that are not conducive to the environment in the country that may lead to actually influencing the voter pattern. But I think what Georgina has left out is that there are economic sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. The diamond industry that she's talking about, the ZMDC, they are under sanctions. All the diamond mining companies are under sanctions. Even the president, how do you expect him to carry out his duties when he's under sanctions. Even the people that were said to be not on sanctions, they are still under economic sanctions. So I think when we talk about the funds, but at the end of the day, let me point out that there will be elections very soon, and people of Zimbabwe are going to vote in a peaceful manner. Where the money is going to come from, definitely the principals have sat down and they set up a team that will come up with the resources, and the resources will be found. And as again my honorable friend Gutu pointed out, once the harmonization process is gone through, people will vote for whichever political party they want. It's very clear. We can't talk about ZANU-PF. Let's talk about policies. What is it that ZANU-PF is going to tell the people of Zimbabwe and the world and the MDC? Then we move forward. We can't be, you can't keep dragging people from this is wrong, that is right. That's the end now. We're looking at the future. What is it that ZANU-PF has got to offer? ZANU-PF, the theme says, peace, empowerment, prosperity, and really we are living in a peaceful environment, as you saw in that report, that the parties can now sit down and discuss and agree to disagree and come up with a common ground.
Well, let me just at that point, if I may, Bright
English.
Matonga, just put directly to Georgina Goodwin the points that you made about sanctions, saying that, for example, the sanctions imposed on a particular diamond company have tied the hands of Zimbabwe. The sanctions imposed on the president individually, which remain in place, have also harmed the ability to govern. Georgina Goodwin, your response to that?
Well, I think, as Mr. Matonga knows, there's a targeted sanctions on individuals and on certain companies. They're not against the people of Zimbabwe, only against those who have abused the people of Zimbabwe.
If you target companies, the buyers, Georgina, excuse me, what is targeted? If you target companies, American companies are not allowed to do business with Zimbabwe. Any company in the world are not allowed to do business with Zimbabwe. Do you call those targeted sanctions? Those are economic sanctions, Georgina. I think you should know better.
Georgina Goodwin?
I don't know what to say. I mean, the Chiazma diamond fields are not officially classified at the moment by the Kimberley process as blood diamonds, but certainly you're finding an unwillingness in the rest of the world to touch diamonds that have caused such enormous amounts of grief to people. There was a lot of violence around there, and the money is not going to the government. The money is going to individuals, we understand.
Well, let's go to Obert Gutu at this particular point, waiting patiently on the line. Bright Matonga, let me just ask Obert Gutu at this particular point, this issue of sanctions. You are part of the government of national unity. How does the movement for democratic change, your particular faction, view this issue of targeted sanctions against specific companies and specific individuals?
The way we look at it is that we are not even talking of sanctions. ZANU-PF is very fond of the S word. And we are saying that these are restrictive measures, as Georgina Goodwin rightly pointed out, that have been imposed against people who are the prime instigators of violence, people who are the prime abusers of people's human rights. And when you look at the issue of diamonds, the diamonds of Zimbabwe, although not classified as blood diamonds as such, they're actually diamonds that are being run by a mafia kind of organization. We are talking of not less than $2 billion of diamond revenue that is not accounted for annually in Zimbabwe. So this issue of saying that we can't sell our diamonds because we are under sanctions is, with respect, completely devoid of merit, misdirected, frivolous, and vexatious.
Bright Matonga had a point to make there. Bright Matonga?
Yeah, I'm surprised that they talk about blood diamonds when there's no in Zimbabwe. These sanctions, because, buyers, anyone wants to come and do business with Zimbabwe, because they have to transact their money using US dollars. The US government, European Union, they have threatened those companies, they've lost money, and really no one will want to do business with a company or a country that is under sanctions. If you put a president under sanctions, which means the whole country is suffering from economic sanctions. That's why there is suffering in Zimbabwe. Not because of, yes, there may be challenges here and there, but because we've got illegal sanctions. They've not been endorsed by the United Nations. You've got a bunch of bullies in the West who think they can do whatever they want in any country. And with Zimbabwe, we're saying no, and we're standing up to the bullies. That's why they're coming to Zimbabwe to negotiate, because they can see where the winds of change are going. They're going in ZANU-PF's way.
Let's just put the issue of sanctions on hold at the moment, if I might, Bright Matonga. And at this stage, just take a point and look where we are standing. The fortunes of Zimbabwe have for more than 30 years been tied to President Robert Mugabe. The guerrilla leader helped free what was then Rhodesia from British and white minority rule in 1980. It earned him hero status and the job of Prime Minister. But Mugabe quickly fell out with fellow freedom fighter Joshua Nkomo. He crushed a rebellion in Midlands and Matabeleland provinces. His forces were accused of killing thousands of civilians. 1987, and Mugabe and Nkomo resolved their differences to form ZANU-PF, and Mugabe became president. 2000 saw the beginning of the seizure of hundreds of white-owned farms, which were handed to black Zimbabweans under what was called a land redistribution policy. The EU imposed crippling sanctions in 2002, a response, it said, to human rights abuses and political violence under Mugabe's rule. The latest in a series of disputed elections was held in 2008, eventually leading to a power-sharing agreement. Mugabe retained the presidency, and the opposition challenger, Morgan Tsvangirai, was sworn in as Prime Minister. And years of wrangling between the two finally yielded results when a referendum gave overwhelming backing, as we mentioned, to a new constitution just last month. Well, Georgina Goodwin, we are looking at a time of anger, a time of great political differences, but on this anniversary, the 33rd anniversary, looking forward to a year in which political change may materialize, has been promised. Does it look any brighter than it did in previous years?
I don't remember 33 years ago. I hope it shows that I'm not quite that old. But what happened at that time was that a very small amount of people, the elite, basically the power transferred from one bunch of the elite to another bunch of the elite. The people of Zimbabwe are not enjoying the freedom for which they fought so hard. Only their leaders are enjoying that. It's a very small bunch of elite who have come to power and are clinging on to it at any cost, it would seem to me. I think that to look ahead, one perhaps has to take a very long view and say, post-Mugabe, post-binary politics in the country, and when perhaps there's nothing left to loot, then the country may be viable.
Well, Bright Matonga, you want to respond to that, the allegation of an elite back in 1980 and
of
now?
Course, Georgina is talking from experience. Of course, with the white elites looting stuff in Zimbabwe, looting all the mineral resources. She came from a very well-to-do family. That's why she could afford, to stay where she is. But President Mugabe and ZANU-PF have been in power for 8 terms because they were voted in by the people of Zimbabwe. That's why he is in charge. We don't have war. She wants to drag us to the past. This is the future. The future of Zimbabwe is a highly literate country, the highest literacy rate in Africa, a country that is in charge of its land, which was forcibly taken by Godwina Georgian's ancestors and parents. We've got that. We've now moved on to the empowerment, where we say, as Zimbabweans, we should have 51%, if not 100% of our resources. There's no going back on that process. So people can say whatever they want to say, but the process of empowering Zimbabweans, politically, economically, and socially is going on.
Well, let's just take a look at the leader of Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe has been variously a scholar and teacher, activist and fighter, president, and some say dictator. At 89, he's the second oldest leader in the world, behind Israel Shimon Peres. His second wife, Grace, 40 years his junior, says he wakes up at 4 a.m. to exercise and keep fit. Mugabe's views on Zimbabwe's former colonial oppressors are well known. He's said to have remarked, "The only white man you can trust is a dead white man." And yet, he's a keen fan of cricket, a quintessentially English game. Mugabe stating, "Cricket civilizes people and creates good gentlemen." He's been criticized for his handling of Zimbabwe's economy, yet his personal fortune is said to be worth up to $3 billion. One harsh critic, Nobel Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu, describes President Mugabe as a cartoon figure of the archetypal African dictator. And yet it appears Robert Mugabe still inspires loyalty and even affection among a myriad of supporters. Well, let's go to Obed Gutu on that particular point. As we heard there from Bright Matonga, despite the opposition, despite the outside pressure, Robert Mugabe remains in power, and it does appear within a certain degree of support. But Gutu, why do you believe that this support exists?
Mr. Mugabe's support base has dwindled dramatically. I was a very young teenager when we acquired independence in 1980. The support for Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF was phenomenal. Growing up in this country as I did for the past 33 years, I've seen the popularity of both Mr. Mugabe and his party plummet. Mr. Mugabe and his party have held on to power through the use of brute force, through the use of thuggery, through institutionalized corruption. I've been on record to say that ZANU-PF is not your conventional political party. ZANU-PF is a movement. ZANU-PF is a mafia organization. And for anyone to say right now Mugabe is the most popular politician in Zimbabwe, with respect, there will be of unsound mind. It's without doubt that the movement for democratic change, led by Morgan Richard Tsvangirai, is arguably the best supported and most popular political movement or political party in Zimbabwe at the moment. And Honorable Matonga knows that.
And yet, if I may, Albert Gutu, just interrupt there, the movement for democratic change itself is split into various factions, a number of factions. Some argue that in 2008, if the vote had not been so fundamentally split, then Morgan Tsvangirai might have emerged a winner without the mess that was created around that election. Georgina Godwin in London, I want to put you that question. Is the opposition within Zimbabwe its own worst enemy when it comes to waging a political struggle?
Well, I certainly think that in the next election, if the two branches of the MDC could work together, then the MDC would have a much better chance of winning the election outright. Mr. Matonga has been talking about how Mugabe is constantly voted in, and Mugabe himself today at the independence celebration said that they were looking forward to a peaceful election. I'd like to point out that that's because once you've created a human billboard, you don't need to make another one. If you hit enough people the first time around, you just need to do it once more and people can see. You just send that person out looking damaged. Everybody's going to do what you say after that. I think that it may be possible to have a violence-free election, but only because people have been so horribly frightened in the past. And as you say, split. The opposition is split between two. And also in Matabele, Matabeleland, we're looking at perhaps the re-emergence of Dumisa Debengwa's ZAPU, which would split it again another way. What the other branch, the MDC-M part of the MDC, is saying is that they feel slightly betrayed within the global political agreement because they feel that the roadmap to elections has gone forward really without the majority of their party participating, and they feel that really they have been left out of it and that their views have not been taken into account at all.
Well, Bright Matonga, if I can go to you, the ZANU-PF is the party of which Robert Mugabe has been the head since the party was formed. Is it perhaps time for party to be separated from its leadership, for the party to fight its own battles and not rely on the status of its longtime leader?
No, you rely on the constitution. What does your party's constitution say? You know, it's very clear. He gets appointed because of his principles. He's very clear in terms of education, in terms of independence. He has delivered independence, political independence, education. You're number one in Africa, if not top 10 in the world. You've empowered your people. Thousands of Zimbabwean people have got access to land. Now thousands of Zimbabweans, have got access to acquiring the assets of Zimbabwe. Yes, there may be challenges in terms of corruption. No one accepts corruption is good. Wherever it is, people should point it out. But it's the principles. Do we have a principled opposition party? No, we don't. If you look at the local authorities or councils that are run by the MDC, the evidence is there for people to see. Where you've got Chitungiza, all the councillors fight. MDC, by the way. Harare, the same thing. From the deputy mayor, 30, from Mutare, all the cities. They're all, you look at the president, their president. What does he spend his time doing? Oh, the world is very clear. I don't even need to go into that. So when it comes to President Mugabe, it's very clear. He doesn't mince his words. He says, he does what he says.
I'm afraid we've come to an end of this particular show. The debate will continue long and hard. My thanks to our guests. On the phone from Harare, Obert Gutu. Also in Harare, Bright Matonga. And in London, Georgina Godwin. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.